Welcome back, dear listener, to The World Asleep. Tonight, the desert lies still beneath a quiet silver moon, and the sands of Egypt stretch endlessly into the night. In the silence of the vast golden dunes, there is a secret buried, one that has awaited millennia to be uncovered. Beneath this ancient land, where time itself seems to pause, a boy king once ruled. His name, Tutankhamun, echoes through history, but who was he really? And why does his story, though brief, continue to captivate the world? In 1922, Howard Carter discovered the boy king's tomb, hidden for thousands of years beneath the earth. Inside, riches beyond imagination were revealed: golden chariots, delicate jewellery, and the legendary death mask. Yet, it wasn't the treasures that lingered in our minds, but the mystery of his life and death. How did this young king come to rule? What led to his untimely passing at such a young age? And what secrets still sleep within the walls of his tomb? Tonight, we will uncover the life of Tutankhamun, the child king who ruled a fractured Egypt, the boy who left behind treasures that told stories, and the death that became shrouded in myth. What hidden truths await us in the dust of the Valley of the Kings? What mysteries have the centuries kept sealed away? So close your eyes, let the stillness of the desert surround you, and allow the whispers of ancient Egypt to guide you on this journey. If you find peace in these quiet travels through time, let me know where you're listening from tonight. And if these stories of the past bring you a moment of serenity, consider liking and subscribing. Wherever you are, I'm grateful to have you with us. Together, we will seek the answers to the questions that have lived with us for so long. Chapter 1: The Boy King, the Life of Tutankhamun. Imagine, if you will, the air of ancient Egypt, warm and heavy, carrying the scent of incense, the distant murmur of the Nile, and the promise of eternal life. Beneath a sun that beats down with unwavering intensity, a boy, not yet a teenager, ascends to the throne of a mighty empire. He is Tutankhamun, the boy king, crowned not by strength, but by the whim of fate. His reign will be brief, fleeting, and largely shrouded in mystery, but it will leave an imprint that endures for centuries to come. In the vast, complex world of ancient Egypt, power was both a blessing and a curse. The pharaohs ruled as living gods, believed to be the divine intermediary between the gods and the people. They were both king and priest, protector and ruler, their word unchallenged, their power absolute. Yet, as with all things in Egypt, power was fleeting. Empires rose and empires fell. Dynasties were born and dissolved, leaving behind nothing but dust and whispers. For Tutankhamun, born in the midst of this uncertainty, his reign began under a shadow. His father, Akhenaten, had been a revolutionary king, one who sought to reshape the very heart of Egypt's religion. Akhenaten's bold move was to abandon the worship of Egypt's traditional pantheon of gods in favour of a single god, the sun disk, Aten. This dramatic religious upheaval sent shockwaves through Egyptian society, unsettling both the priesthood and the people. The changes were radical, destabilizing, and in many ways doomed to fail. By the time Tutankhamun was born, Akhenaten's reign was coming to an end. Egypt was fractured, torn between old beliefs and new ones. Akhenaten's reforms had alienated powerful figures within the court and temple, and his legacy would be one of division rather than unity. Tutankhamun's mother, Queen Kia, was one of Akhenaten's lesser wives, and it's believed that his father's reforms deeply affected her son's early years. When Akhenaten died, Tutankhamun, barely a boy, found himself thrust onto the throne. The once mighty empire was now a land of uncertainty, caught between the old gods and the new order. The circumstances of Tutankhamun's accession remain a subject of debate among historians. Some scholars suggest that Tutankhamun was placed on the throne by the powerful Vizier A, or even by Horemheb, a military leader who would later rise to power. The boy was far too young to rule alone, and so, it is believed, his reign was largely influenced by his advisors. But though Tutankhamun's hand may have been guided by others, it was still his name that would be etched into history. But who was Tutankhamun beyond the throne? What was his life like before he became a figure of legend? The answers remain elusive, yet fragments of his life emerge like pieces of a shattered mosaic. Tutankhamun's tomb, which would later reveal riches beyond imagining, provides clues not only to his reign but also to his health, his struggles, and the life he led in the shadow of a fallen dynasty. The young king's early years were spent in the opulent court of Amarna, the city built by his father Akhenaten in honour of the sun god Aten. Amarna, once a centre of grandeur, was abandoned after Akhenaten's death, but before this fall from grace, it was a city of light and innovation. It was here, amidst the marble palaces and temples, that Tutankhamun would have first learned the ways of kingship, though, as a child, he could hardly have grasped the full weight of the responsibility that lay upon his tiny shoulders. What would a young boy, no older than 9, think of when faced with such a monumental role? Perhaps like any child, his thoughts were not on the intrigues of the court or the politics of empire. Perhaps his world was filled with simpler joys, games, lessons in archery, and the music of the court. There are hints that Tutankhamun's health was frail, and evidence from his tomb suggests that he may have suffered from various ailments during his childhood. He was believed to have been afflicted with a clubbed foot, which would have made walking difficult and likely confined him to the use of a cane. His body also bore signs of other physical ailments, such as a slight scoliosis, which may have added to his discomfort and isolation. In fact, one of the most striking aspects of Tutankhamun's life, as uncovered through modern science, is the fragile nature of his body. CT scans of his mummy have revealed that despite his royal lineage, Tutankhamun was not the picture of health that one might expect of a pharaoh. He was likely frail, sickly, and perhaps even in constant pain. The boy who would one day be remembered as one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs may never have been strong enough to govern Egypt alone. His reign, though short, was likely shaped not by his own decisions, but by the counsel of others, most notably Ai and Horemheb. But what is power when one's body is weak, and one's reign is shaped by others? Is the title of king just an empty shell, or does it carry weight even when the throne is not truly held? In Tutankhamun's case, his legacy was not built on grand conquests or monumental decisions. Instead, his name endures in the treasure-laden tomb he left behind, a tomb that would reveal the splendour of ancient Egypt to the world. His reign may have been brief, but it was his tomb, with its treasures and mysteries, that would ensure his immortality. The Boy King's story is one of contrasts, weakness and power, fragility and grandeur. He was a king in name, but perhaps not in substance. His youth, his health, and the political chaos of his time may have prevented him from shaping Egypt in the way other pharaohs had. Yet, it was in his tomb, nestled deep within the Valley of the Kings, that Tutankhamun's story would truly unfold. And it was there, buried beneath layers of history, that the riches of Egypt's past would be revealed. Even as a young boy, Tutankhamun's life was not without consequence. The world around him shifted dramatically as he sat upon the throne. The end of his father's reign marked the collapse of the religious reforms that had sought to revolutionize Egypt. Akhenaten's worship of Aten was abandoned, and Egypt returned to the traditional pantheon of gods, Amun, Osiris, and Ra. It is thought that, under the reign of Tutankhamun, the old religious order was reinstated, and the temples of the gods were reopened. This period marked the restoration of Egypt's spiritual balance, even if the boy king was not the one to dictate these changes. Tutankhamun's reign, though short and seemingly uneventful, set the stage for the return to Egypt's golden age. He played a pivotal role, even if he didn't realize it, in bringing the country back from the brink of religious upheaval. And yet, the boy king's life was still a mystery, one that would be unraveled centuries later, not through the annals of history, but through the treasures left behind in his tomb. As we delve deeper into the story of Tutankhamun, we find that his life, though marked by fragility, was filled with the weight of expectation. Perhaps the greatest irony of his story lies in the fact that his power as a king was never fully realized. His reign was not one of conquest, not one of triumph, yet it was his death and the discovery of his tomb that would secure his place in the history of ancient Egypt. The boy king, though he never had the chance to wield his power fully, would become the king we remember most. His tomb, rich with treasures, remains a testament to the grandeur of Egypt's past, and it is in those treasures that the true story of Tutankhamun can be found. But what of the man himself? What did he think as he sat on the throne, surrounded by advisors and courtiers, his body frail and his destiny uncertain? How did he face the challenges of ruling a nation, even if those challenges were beyond his control? These are questions that may never be fully answered, but they add to the mystery of Tutankhamun's life, and ultimately, his death. As we move forward in this journey, we will uncover the story of the boy who ruled not by might, but by circumstance. His legacy may not lie in the battles he fought or the empire he built, but in the whispers of history and the treasures of his tomb. Chapter 2. The death of the boy king. The mystery unveiled. The sun sets softly over the Valley of the Kings, casting long ancient shadows across the tombs of Egypt's pharaohs. Beneath this quiet sky, the tomb of Tutankhamun rests, its walls adorned with the symbols of life and death, a final resting place for a boy king whose story has captivated us for centuries. But though the tomb has been discovered, though the treasures within it have been revealed, the story of Tutankhamun's death remains wrapped in mystery, shrouded in the same uncertainty that followed him throughout his life. At the age of 18, Tutankhamun's reign came to a sudden, untimely end. The cause of his death has remained one of Egyptology's most enduring enigmas. Was it the result of an illness, a violent injury, or perhaps something far more sinister? And why, in such a young and fragile king, did death strike with such swiftness? For years, scholars and historians have speculated on the circumstances surrounding the death of Tutankhamun. Some suggest that he succumbed to a deadly disease, malaria perhaps, which was rampant in ancient Egypt. Others argue that a fatal accident may have been the cause, possibly related to a chariot crash or an injury sustained during one of his brief campaigns. And there are those who suggest that political intrigue, a dark conspiracy, may have played a part in his demise. The answers to these questions remain elusive, yet modern science has provided us with a glimpse into the boy king's final days. Through CT scans and other advanced techniques, researchers have been able to peer into the mummified remains of Tutankhamun, uncovering clues that hint at the true cause of his death. At first glance, Tutankhamun's body appears as though it should belong to someone much older than a teenager. His bones show signs of damage, evidence of physical strain. His skull bears the imprint of a blow, perhaps from a fall or an accident, and yet there are no obvious signs of fatal trauma. The cause of his sudden death, then, may not have been an injury alone. There may have been other factors at play, factors that could help explain why a young king with so much promise was taken from this world far too soon. One of the most telling clues comes from the discovery of a clubbed foot. a deformity that would have made walking difficult and may have further isolated Tutankhamun from his peers. This physical weakness, coupled with other signs of ill health, suggests that Tutankhamun's body may have been frail throughout his life. The mummified remains also reveal traces of a parasitic infection, evidence of malaria that may have weakened his immune system, leaving him vulnerable to the rigours of kingship and the diseases that plagued ancient Egypt. But despite these findings, there is still no definitive answer to the question of how Tutankhamun died. Was it the result of an illness, a fall from his chariot, or was there something far darker at play? There are whispers of a conspiracy, a tale as ancient as Egypt itself. Some suggest that Tutankhamun's death may have been orchestrated by those who stood to gain from his passing. His reign, after all, had been shaped by advisors, and it's possible that those advisors saw an opportunity to seize power after the boy king's death. Political intrigue, though difficult to prove, remains a tantalizing possibility. Yet, despite the many theories, there is one certainty. Tutankhamun's death was a turning point in Egyptian history. His passing marked the end of a fragile dynasty and the beginning of a new era under the leadership of those who would follow him. The boy king, whose reign had been brief and largely inconsequential, became, in death, one of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, his name etched forever in the annals of history. As the years passed, Tutankhamun's tomb, hidden in the Valley of the Kings, would remain sealed, its contents untouched by the hands of time. But even as the tomb lay undisturbed, the mystery of his death continued to loom large over the world of Egyptology. The death of Tutankhamun, however tragic, was not the end of his story. In fact, it was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter that would see his name rise to prominence once more, thanks to the discovery of his tomb and the treasures hidden within it. When Howard Carter first laid eyes on the tomb in 1922, it was a moment of unparalleled excitement and wonder. The tomb had remained sealed for over 3,000 years, untouched by the ravages of time. And inside, Carter found a wealth of treasures, golden statues, intricately carved chariots, fine jewellery, and the famous golden death mask. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery was the body of Tutankhamun, himself, preserved in all its fragility, its mystery undiminished by the passage of centuries. The tomb, once thought to be that of a lesser king, became a gateway into the world of ancient Egypt. As Carter's team painstakingly catalogued the treasures and examined the mummified remains, the world began to take notice of the boy king, whose life and death had been forgotten for so long. And yet, the more we learned about Tutankhamun, the more questions arose. Why, for example, was the tomb so small compared to others in the Valley of the Kings? Why was it so hastily constructed? Was it a reflection of the boy king's sudden ascension to the throne, or was it a sign of something more ominous? The tomb itself may hold the key to these questions. Its layout is unusual, with narrow passageways and a small burial chamber. The presence of numerous objects, such as the golden chariots and finely crafted jewellery, suggests that Tutankhamun's death was sudden and unexpected. He may not have had the time to prepare for his journey into the afterlife, leading to the hurried and less than ideal construction of his tomb, and yet, despite the small size of the tomb, it is filled with treasures beyond compare. Golden statues of gods and pharaohs, intricately carved thrones, and chests filled with precious stones and metals. But what of the most famous artifact of all, the golden death mask? This iconic image of Tutankhamun, with its strikingly lifelike features, would become the symbol of his reign and his mysterious death. The mask, which would later be admired by millions around the world, was designed to protect the king's soul in the afterlife. It is an exquisite example of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship, with intricate details that capture the boy king's youth and the dignity of his office. And yet, behind the mask, there is a deeper mystery. Why was such a grand mask created for a king whose reign was so short? Was it a reflection of the hope for immortality? Or was it the work of those who sought to immortalize Tutankhamun's name, even as his life remained a mystery? The boy king's tomb, with its dazzling treasures and haunting images, tells a story of a boy who was not destined to rule for long. His reign was brief, but his legacy, created by those who followed him and those who unearthed his tomb, would live on for millennia. But even as we marvel at the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, we must ask, what lies behind the mask? What secrets did the boy king take with him to the afterlife? And why has his death remained a mystery for so long? The answers may never be fully known, but perhaps in the mystery itself there is a deeper truth. The death of Tutankhamun is a reminder of the fragility of life, the fleeting nature of power, and the enduring mystery of history. We may never know the exact cause of his death, but in the silence that surrounds it, we're reminded of the enigma of time itself, how it takes with it the answers to our most pressing questions, leaving only the whisper of forgotten kings in the sands of Egypt. As we stand before the tomb of Tutankhamun, we are reminded that the boy king, though he ruled for such a brief time, has become one of the most enduring symbols of ancient Egypt. His death, though shrouded in mystery, continues to captivate our imaginations. The mask, the treasures, and the story of his life and death invite us to reflect not only on the mysteries of the past, but on the questions that continue to linger in our own time. And so, as we leave the tomb behind and walk through the shadowed corridors of history, we carry with us the echoes of a boy who lived, who ruled, and who died, leaving behind a legacy that will never fade. The mystery of Tutankhamun's death may never be solved, but in the mystery itself we find the beauty of a story that endures through the ages. Chapter 3: The Tomb of Tutankhamun, Treasures and Secrets. The night is still, the air heavy with the weight of centuries as we stand at the threshold of a tomb that has lain undisturbed for over 3,000 years. In the shadow of the Great Pyramids, in the heart of Egypt's sacred Valley of the Kings, the tomb of Tutankhamun awaits. Its entrance hidden beneath layers of rock and sand, its treasures buried in the silence of time. And yet, in 1922, the world would discover that this tomb, seemingly unremarkable in its simplicity, contained one of the most astonishing finds in the history of archaeology. Imagine the scene as Howard Carter, the British archaeologist, and his team of intrepid explorers push open the sealed door of the tomb. The air inside is thick with dust, untouched for millennia, and as their torches illuminate the darkness, they find themselves surrounded by a trove of treasures, untouched by time. The room is filled with golden statues, intricately carved furniture, and hundreds of items meant to accompany the young king on his journey to the afterlife. But it is not just the treasures that captivate. They are the key to understanding Tutankhamun's life, death, and the world he inhabited. Tutankhamun's tomb, catalogued as KV62, is small by comparison to the tombs of other pharaohs who ruled in Egypt's Golden Age. But within its modest chambers, a world of unimaginable wealth is revealed. The tomb's design reflects the hasty nature of its construction, an unassuming burial place for a king whose reign was cut short. And yet, the more Carter and his team uncovered, the clearer it became that Tutankhamun's tomb was no ordinary resting place. This was the burial of a king whose treasures were so numerous, so carefully crafted, that they would reveal the splendour of ancient Egypt to the world for the first time. The walls of Tutankhamun's tomb were lined with treasures, artifacts and items meant to accompany the king into the afterlife. A chamber filled with gilded statues of gods and goddesses, furniture carved with the likeness of the king, and chests brimming with precious gems and metals, the tomb spoke of wealth beyond imagination. Yet, despite the dazzling display, there was an eerie quietness to the scene. Unlike the tombs of more powerful pharaohs, there was no evidence of grand burial rituals, no elaborate murals depicting the king's journey into the afterlife. Instead, the tomb seemed to tell a different story, one of a king who, perhaps, had been hurriedly laid to rest, his tomb constructed in haste, with none of the grand flourishes that accompanied other rulers. The most famous and iconic of all the treasures found within the tomb is the golden death mask of Tutankhamun. This stunning work of art, which now graces the halls of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, captures the boy king's youthful features in exquisite detail. The mask is made of solid gold, adorned with lapis lazuli, turquoise, and other precious stones, and it serves as both a portrait of the king and a symbolic representation of his journey into the afterlife. The eyes of the mask seem to look out at us through the ages, their gaze fixed, serene, and eternal. The intricacy of the mask's design, the wealth of materials used, and the craftsmanship involved reflect the importance placed on the king's passage into the next life. But what does the mask represent? Why, in a tomb meant for a relatively minor king, was such a grand work of art created? The answer lies in the belief system of ancient Egypt, the belief in an afterlife in which the soul of the king would travel through the underworld, facing trials and challenges before being judged by the gods. The death mask was not just a portrait, it was a protective symbol, meant to safeguard the king's soul as it journeyed through the perilous realms of the afterlife. It was an assurance that, even in death, Tutankhamun would not be forgotten, that his name would endure. Beyond the death mask, the tomb held a staggering array of other items meant to accompany the king into the afterlife. One of the most remarkable finds was the presence of 2 gilded chariots. These vehicles, intricately crafted and carefully stored, were meant to carry the king through the afterlife, just as they would have transported him across the land during his reign. The chariots, with their delicate craftsmanship and their gilded wheels, are a testament to the artistry and technical prowess of ancient Egyptian craftsmen. They also serve as a reminder of the king's fleeting life, a life filled with the opulence and grandeur of Egypt, yet ultimately cut short. In addition to the chariots, there were countless other treasures, wooden beds, chairs, and chests, all covered in gold leaf. The items were designed not only to serve the king in the afterlife, but to reflect his royal status and ensure his comfort in the next world. Every object found in the tomb seemed to be imbued with meaning, each one a symbol of wealth, power, and the eternal journey. Among the more curious finds were hundreds of statuettes depicting gods and creatures from Egyptian mythology, as well as painted wooden panels that once decorated the tomb, telling stories of the king's passage into the afterlife. What strikes one most about these treasures is their sheer abundance. In the tomb of a young king, whose reign lasted barely a decade, we find a staggering wealth of objects, many of which were never intended for the mortal world. The treasures, carefully curated and painstakingly placed within the tomb, suggest a deep belief in the afterlife, one where the king would need all of these things, not for his earthly pleasures, but for his journey through the realms of the gods. But despite the extraordinary nature of these discoveries, there are questions that remain unanswered. Why was the tomb so small, so hurriedly constructed? Why were there no elaborate murals or inscriptions that celebrated Tutankhamun's life and reign? The answer, it seems, lies in the suddenness of the king's death. Unlike other pharaohs whose tombs were constructed over many years, Tutankhamun's burial place appears to have been hastily prepared. The tomb was likely intended for someone else, perhaps a royal official or a lesser king. but was repurposed for Tutankhamun when his death came unexpectedly. It is likely that his early death, at the age of just 18, left little time for the grand preparations that accompanied other royal burials. This hurried construction, however, did not diminish the magnificence of the tomb's contents. The treasures inside, though they may not have been intended for Tutankhamun originally, were a reflection of the wealth and power of Egypt at its peak. And so, when Carter and his team uncovered these treasures, they were not just discovering objects of gold and precious stones. They were uncovering the essence of Egypt itself. They were revealing a world of splendour, belief, and artistry that had been hidden from the world for thousands of years. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Tutankhamun's tomb is the sense of mystery that still surrounds it. Even as the treasures were catalogued and studied, there was a palpable sense that the tomb held something more, something yet to be discovered. Despite the vast amount of wealth and artistry found inside, it was clear that Tutankhamun's tomb held a deeper significance. The way the objects were arranged, the careful placement of each item, spoke of a ritual that transcended the mere acquisition of riches. There was a story being told, one of life, death, and the journey beyond. And then there was the curse. In the years following the discovery of the tomb, a strange and eerie phenomenon began to unfold. The people involved in the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb, Carter himself, Lord Carnarvon and others, began to meet untimely, unexplained deaths. The media seized on this, and in turn, the story of the curse of the pharaohs was born. The curse, it was said, would strike down anyone who disturbed the tomb of the ancient king, bringing death and misfortune upon them. Though modern scholars have debunked the idea of a supernatural curse, there is no denying the sense of foreboding that surrounds the tomb. Even today, many who stand before the mask of Tutankhamun or gaze upon the treasures of his tomb feel a strange sense of awe, an understanding that the boy king's journey through life and death is one that continues to captivate our imaginations. As we stand before the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb, we are reminded that this young king, who reigned for only a brief moment in Egypt's vast history, has become one of the most famous pharaohs of all time. His tomb, though small and hastily constructed, is a treasure trove that reveals the grandeur of ancient Egypt and the intricate rituals of the afterlife. The golden mask, the chariots, the jewellery, each item tells a story, not just of a boy king, but of a civilization that believed in the eternal journey of the soul. And so, as the treasures of Tutankhamun's tomb continue to captivate and intrigue us, we're left with more questions than answers. What was the true purpose behind these objects? Why was this tomb so different from the others? And what mysteries still remain, hidden in the silence of the tomb, waiting to be revealed? The answers may never come, but in the treasures and the stories they tell, we find a glimpse into a world that once was, one that continues to echo through the sands of time. The tomb of Tutankhamun is more than a burial place. It is a testament to the beliefs, artistry, and legacy of ancient Egypt. And as we gaze upon the riches within it, we're reminded that the boy king, though young and frail, has left behind a legacy that will never fade. The tomb, with its treasures, its mysteries, and its secrets, will continue to speak to us across the millennia, whispering the story of a king whose life and death remain as enigmatic as the land from which he came. Chapter 4: The Curse of the Pharaoh. Myth or reality? The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, while a momentous occasion for archaeology, also sparked a cascade of eerie events that would forever intertwine the boy king's name with the supernatural. The first whispers of a curse emerged almost immediately after the tomb was opened. Lord Carnarvon, the British aristocrat who had funded the excavation, was the first to fall victim. His sudden death from an infected mosquito bite in April 1923 just months after the tomb was uncovered, seemed almost too perfectly timed to be dismissed as coincidence. The media, hungry for stories of intrigue, quickly latched onto the idea that the curse had struck. The death of the man who had financed the discovery of Egypt's most remarkable tomb was just the beginning. As the tale of Carnarvon's death spread, so too did the legend of a curse, one that was said to strike down those who dared disturb the tomb of the ancient king. The press seized upon this notion, feeding the flames of superstition. Soon, other members of the excavation party also seemed to meet untimely deaths. George Gould, an American who had financed part of the expedition, passed away under mysterious circumstances. Sir Bruce Ingram, a journalist involved in the discovery, suffered the loss of his home in a strange fire. Each death, each misfortune, only seemed to confirm the existence of the curse. The world began to believe that Tutankhamun, even in death, was protecting his tomb with a vengeance. But as the years passed, doubts began to emerge. Howard Carter, the man who had uncovered the tomb, remained steadfast in his belief that the deaths were not the result of a supernatural curse, but were, rather, tragic coincidences. He had long dismissed the idea of curses in favour of logic and reason. It was not the tomb's contents, nor the boy king's spirit that had claimed these lives, but the ordinary risks of exploration in a foreign land. Mosquito bites, illnesses, and accidents could explain most of the tragedies, Carter argued. But no matter how logical his explanation, the story of the curse had already taken root in the public's imagination. And so, the myth persisted, drawing the curious, the frightened, and the fascinated to Egypt. The tomb of Tutankhamun, once just the final resting place of an obscure pharaoh, had become a place of mystery and legend. The idea that Tutankhamun, though forgotten in life, had reached out from beyond the grave to exact revenge on those who disturbed his final resting place gave his name a life it had never known during his short reign. The boy king, whose reign was as fleeting as his life, had become a symbol of the unknown, of the powers beyond human comprehension, waiting patiently in the silence of time. Yet, even as the legend of the curse captivated the world, the tomb itself, its treasures, its wealth, was being quietly revealed, offering a far more tangible legacy. What emerged from the tomb was not just a tale of misfortune, but a collection of riches and wonders that told the story of ancient Egypt at its height. Though the curse seemed to overshadow much of the discovery, it was the treasures that would eventually secure Tutankhamun's place in history. As the tomb was fully unearthed, a staggering array of artifacts came to light. Gold, jewellery, statues, and chests filled with items meant to accompany the king into the afterlife all lay within. And yet, despite the wealth, the tomb itself was a curious one, much smaller and more hastily constructed than those of Egypt's more powerful pharaohs. It was almost as if it had been prepared in a rush, a hurried burial for a king who had been taken far too soon. No grand murals adorned the walls. No elaborate inscriptions chronicled the boy king's reign. It was a simple tomb, but within it lay the incredible opulence of Egypt's craftsmanship and culture. The golden death mask, perhaps the most famous of all the artifacts, became a symbol not just of the boy king, but of the entire ancient civilization. The mask, made of solid gold and adorned with lapis lazuli and turquoise, captured the boy king's face with such exquisite detail that it felt as though Tutankhamun himself might still be alive, frozen forever in the cold, gleaming metal. It was a breathtaking work of art, and yet it also spoke of Egypt's belief in the afterlife, of a world beyond the grave where the soul would need protection and guidance. The mask, a perfect likeness of the king's youthful face, was not just a portrait. It was a safeguard for his soul, ensuring that he would be recognized and protected as he journeyed into the afterlife. In addition to the death mask, the tomb revealed an array of other treasures: golden chariots, intricately designed thrones, delicate jewellery, and wooden furniture gilded with gold. These items, meant to accompany Tutankhamun into the afterlife, spoke of the grandeur of Egypt, of a civilization that believed in an eternal journey, one that could be aided by the wealth and beauty of this world. The presence of these items in the tomb suggested that, though Tutankhamun's reign had been brief, he was still treated with the full respect and dignity of a pharaoh. These treasures were not just for the king's earthly enjoyment, but were designed to ensure his comfort and protection in the afterlife. Among the most striking finds were the 2 gilded chariots, symbols of royal power and status. The chariots, along with other items in the tomb, were carefully crafted to reflect the king's life, but they were also designed to provide for his needs in the afterlife. It is likely that these items were meant to help him navigate the afterlife's treacherous journey, as the chariots had once helped him navigate the terrain of Egypt during his lifetime. They were a testament to the technological advancements of ancient Egypt, as well as a reflection of the king's wealth and royal authority. And yet, despite the incredible treasures that filled Tutankhamun's tomb, there was a sense of mystery about the burial. Why had the tomb been so hastily constructed? Why were there no elaborate inscriptions or murals celebrating Tutankhamun's reign, as there were in the tombs of other pharaohs? The answer may lie in the suddenness of the king's death. Tutankhamun's reign had been cut short, and there was little time to prepare a grand burial. The tomb was likely intended for someone else, perhaps a lesser royal, or even a high-ranking official, but it was repurposed for Tutankhamun when his death came unexpectedly. Despite the tomb's simplicity, the wealth of its contents reveal the splendour of Egypt's past. And though the boy king's life and reign had been fleeting, the treasures of his tomb told a different story, one of grandeur, of beauty, and of a belief in an afterlife filled with comfort and peace. The more the tomb was studied, the clearer it became that Tutankhamun's legacy was not in the deeds he performed as a ruler, but in the riches left behind to accompany him into eternity. The tomb itself, small and humble in comparison to others in the Valley of the Kings, seemed to stand as a reflection of the fragility of the king's life. The haste with which it was constructed spoke to the suddenness of his death, and yet the treasures found within were a reminder of the grandeur of Egypt's past. These treasures, rich in their beauty and craftsmanship, ensured that Tutankhamun's name would live on long after his untimely death. In the end, it was not the curse or the legends that surrounded Tutankhamun that would define his legacy, but the treasures of his tomb. As these artifacts were uncovered, they revealed not just a boy king, but the essence of a civilization that believed in the eternal journey. The tomb of Tutankhamun, despite its simplicity, held within it the richness of Egypt itself. And as the tomb's mysteries continued to unfold, they would offer a window into the past, revealing the belief, the artistry, and the grandeur of one of the world's oldest and most enduring civilizations. Chapter 5: The Legacy of Tutankhamun, a King's Enduring Influence. When the boy king ascended to the throne at such a tender age, few would have imagined that his name would one day resonate through the corridors of history. His reign, brief and largely uneventful, seemed destined to fade into obscurity, lost among the many pharaohs who came before and after him. Yet the discovery of his tomb in 1922 changed all of that. In an instant, the forgotten king became one of the most famous figures of ancient Egypt, not for his accomplishments on the throne, but for the treasure-laden tomb he left behind, a tomb that would become the gateway to unlocking the mysteries of a civilization long past. Though his time on the throne was short, the legacy of what was found in his tomb continues to captivate the world, revealing a culture and belief system that, for all its grandeur, held a deep sense of fragility and reverence for the afterlife. The treasures he was buried with, despite the brevity of his reign, were not simply tokens of wealth. They were imbued with significance, each one a symbol of the eternal journey the Egyptians believed awaited every soul. These treasures would outlive the boy king, ensuring that his name would echo through the ages, even as his life had been cut short. In life, he was just another child king, thrust into a role of immense responsibility, with advisors and guardians shaping the course of his reign. His kingdom had been fractured, and his reign, though legitimate, was overshadowed by the chaos that followed his father's revolutionary attempts to shift Egypt's religious focus. Yet it is not for his deeds on earth that he is remembered. It is for what was buried with him, for the treasures meant to accompany him into eternity. The tomb itself, though smaller than the grandiose burial places of the great pharaohs, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The discovery of his resting place revealed not just material wealth, but an astonishing array of objects that spoke to the culture, beliefs, and artistry of ancient Egypt. Golden statues of gods and pharaohs, finely crafted furniture, jewellery of untold beauty, all of these were meant to ensure his comfort in the afterlife. Yet these objects did more than serve their purpose as burial goods. They revealed a deeper, more profound connection to a civilization that believed in immortality, divinity, and cosmic balance. His tomb was a time capsule, perfectly preserved for over 3,000 years, offering an unfiltered view into the heart of ancient Egyptian belief and artistry. The treasures found within it showcased Egypt's unparalleled craftsmanship, the delicate inlays of lapis lazuli and turquoise, the gleaming gold, and the intricately designed chariots. The king, despite his brief reign, was a living symbol of Egypt's golden age, and his tomb became a testament to the splendor and sophistication of the empire that created it. The golden death mask, perhaps the most iconic of all the treasures, would come to symbolize not just the king but the civilization itself. The mask, made of solid gold and adorned with lapis lazuli and other precious stones, is both a portrait and a protective symbol. It captures the youthful features of the king, a boy who never grew into the man he might have become, frozen forever in the gleaming metal. The mask was not only meant to safeguard his soul in the afterlife, but also to ensure his recognition by the gods, for the journey through the afterlife was fraught with dangers and obstacles. In the face of this eternal journey, the mask served as a beacon, a symbol of the king's immortality, ensuring that his name would be remembered. But it wasn't just the mask that captivated the world. It was the sheer wealth and variety of the objects found within the tomb. The chariots, gold-adorned and exquisitely crafted, were more than just ceremonial vehicles. They were symbolic of his power, his mobility, and his connection to the gods. In life, the chariots would have been used for hunting and perhaps military endeavours. In death, they were meant to carry his soul through the afterlife, aiding him in his journey. These objects, like the mask, were both functional and symbolic, representing the king's royal status and his place in the divine order. The jewellery was no less stunning. Intricately designed, each piece spoke to the unparalleled skill of Egyptian artisans. The necklaces, bracelets, and rings were crafted from gold, inlaid with semi-precious stones, each one representing a different aspect of the king's spiritual journey. The materials themselves were imbued with meaning: gold, the metal of the gods, and stones that had long been associated with protection, power, and wisdom. And yet, despite the opulence of the tomb, there was something more profound than the material wealth contained within it. Each object, each treasure, was a key to understanding not just the boy king, but the society that created him. His tomb, in its wealth and its simplicity, told the story of a civilization that placed immense value on the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, death was not an end. It was a transition into another realm, where the soul would continue its journey toward immortality. The objects found in the tomb were not just things for the king to enjoy in death. They were vital tools for his passage into eternity. But the king's legacy was not defined solely by the treasures he left behind. The tomb itself, in all its simplicity, marked a turning point in the study of ancient Egypt. The hasty construction of the tomb, though initially perplexing, spoke to the king's untimely death and the abruptness of his reign. Unlike the tombs of other pharaohs, whose resting places were meticulously planned and grandly constructed over many years, the tomb of the boy king seemed almost rushed. It was as though he had not been expected to die so young, and there was little time to prepare a grand burial. The tomb's smaller size, its hurried construction, suggested that his death had been sudden, leaving his advisors with little time to craft the monumental burial that would have accompanied a more powerful ruler. In some ways, this seeming hasty construction only added to the mystery surrounding his life and death. Why had his tomb been so modest? Was it simply due to the abruptness of his passing? Or was there something more to the story? Was there a deeper reason for the tomb's simplicity? Something that had been hidden for millennia and would not be uncovered until the tomb was finally opened? Despite the simplicity of the tomb's design, the wealth and variety of the treasures it contained were a testament to the splendor of ancient Egypt. The world had long known of Egypt's greatness, its towering pyramids, its monuments to the gods, its enduring culture. But the boy king's tomb, small and unassuming though it may have been, spoke to the intricacies of the Egyptian worldview. It revealed the immense value placed on the afterlife, on the journey of the soul, and on the connection between the living and the divine. When the tomb was first opened, it became clear that it was not simply the wealth of the treasures that was important. What mattered was their meaning, the way in which they told the story of a civilization's deep spiritual beliefs. The gold and jewels were not just signs of royal wealth, they were signs of the king's place in the great cosmic order. They were the tools that would accompany him as he made his way through the underworld toward his final judgment, where his heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth. The discovery of the tomb also brought with it a new understanding of the political landscape of Egypt at the time. Though the king's reign had been short and seemingly insignificant, the treasures and the symbolism contained within his tomb suggested a kingdom that was still strong, still rooted in its ancient beliefs, and still capable of producing the artistry and craftsmanship that had made it great. Tutankhamun may have been a child when he took the throne, but the civilization that raised him had been one of the most powerful in the ancient world. His tomb, though it lacked the grandeur of some of his predecessors, was a reflection of the culture that had created it, one that had endured for millennia and would continue to captivate the world long after it had faded into the past. In the years following the discovery of the tomb, Egyptology would flourish, fueled by the treasures uncovered in Tutankhamun's final resting place. The artifacts so carefully preserved would provide a wealth of knowledge about ancient Egyptian society. The tomb had given the world more than just a collection of gold and jewels. It had given a glimpse into the hearts and minds of those who had lived thousands of years before. It was through the treasures of the boy king that we would come to understand the soul of ancient Egypt, not through the grandeur of its monuments, but through the simple objects meant to accompany a king on his journey into eternity. Today, the boy king's name is known around the world, not because of his reign, but because of the treasures and the legacy that were left behind in his tomb. His story is not one of military conquest or great political reform, but of a civilization's belief in immortality and the connection between life and death. Through his tomb, we glimpse a world that has long since faded into the sands of time, a world where the soul was as important as the body, and where the journey into the afterlife was as vital as the life that came before. And so, the boy king lives on, not through the monuments built in his honour, but through the treasures left behind in his tomb. Through these treasures we are connected not just to him, but to the culture that produced them, a culture whose legacy continues to shape our understanding of the ancient world. Tutankhamun, though he ruled for such a short time, has become a symbol of Egypt's enduring power, its grandeur and its mystery. His tomb may have been simple, but the story it tells is one of immortality, belief, and the power of art and culture to transcend time itself. Through his treasures, the boy king continues to speak to us across the millennia, leaving behind a legacy that will never fade. Chapter 6: The Journey to the Afterlife. The Spiritual Legacy of Tutankhamun. The tomb of Tutankhamun stands not just as a final resting place, but as a carefully constructed bridge to the eternal. Beyond the glittering treasures, the gilded chariots, and the precious stones, there lies an intricate tapestry of beliefs, rituals and symbols woven by the ancient Egyptians, a civilization whose view of life, death, and the afterlife shaped everything they did. As we stand before the tomb, we must ask, what did it mean to journey through the afterlife in ancient Egypt? What kind of life awaited the boy king in the realms beyond the mortal world? The ancient Egyptians believed that death was not the end but a transition, a crossing into a realm of darkness and uncertainty that only the bravest and most prepared souls could navigate. The afterlife, or duat, was a realm where the deceased would face tests, judgments, and trials before they could join the gods in a blessed existence. For the pharaohs, this journey was particularly significant. As the living god on earth, the pharaoh had a divine role to fulfill, and it was believed that their passage into the afterlife would ensure Egypt's continued prosperity and cosmic order. Tutankhamun, despite his brief reign, was no different. His tomb was a spiritual vessel, one carefully prepared for the king's passage into the afterlife. Every treasure, every statue, every intricate carving was not just a decoration, but a vital tool in helping him overcome the trials he would face beyond the mortal world. His tomb, though smaller and more hastily constructed than others, was nonetheless filled with objects that reflected Egypt's deep belief in life after death. And at the heart of it all was the king, the boy who would embark on the same perilous journey as every other soul, guided by the wisdom of the gods and the rituals designed to ensure a smooth passage. The ancient Egyptians believed that the soul was comprised of several parts, each playing a distinct role in the afterlife. The ka was the life force, the vital energy that continued to exist after death, and it needed sustenance to thrive in the afterlife. The bay was the personality or spirit, capable of leaving the tomb to travel the earth or the heavens, often taking the form of a bird. The ak was the immortal, divine part of the soul, which could only achieve its ultimate form through successful passage through the duat. The ka would remain in the tomb, sustained by offerings of food and drink placed before the deceased, while the ba would be free to roam. It was the journey of the ak that was the ultimate goal, a journey that, if successful, would lead the soul to join the gods in an eternal, blessed afterlife. In Tutankhamun's case, this journey was carefully planned for, even though his reign was brief. His tomb was filled with objects meant to ensure that his soul would pass the trials ahead and emerge victorious. The gods, who had watched over him during his life, would continue to guide him in death, and the treasures buried with him were tools for this divine journey. The golden death mask, the most famous of all the items found in the tomb, was one of the key instruments for ensuring the king's protection in the afterlife. Not just a portrait of the king, it was a powerful symbol meant to safeguard his soul. The mask, made of solid gold and adorned with precious stones, captured his likeness in exquisite detail, but its function was far more than aesthetic. It was believed to be a protective tool, a means of identifying and preserving the king's essence. As the king's body would decay, the mask would remain, a beacon for his soul, guiding it through the darkness of the underworld and ensuring that he would not be lost in the afterlife. But the mask was just one of the many objects that played a role in his spiritual journey. In addition to the golden treasures, there were hundreds of small statues of gods and creatures from Egyptian mythology, each one serving a specific function. Some were meant to protect the king's body, others to guide his spirit, and still others to act as intermediaries between the living and the divine. The gods that the Egyptians worshipped were many and varied, each with their own domain and influence over the realms of life and death. Some were benevolent, offering protection and guidance. Others were fearsome, capable of punishing those who did not meet the strict standards set by the gods. The statues within Tutankhamun's tomb were meant to call upon these gods, each one fulfilling a specific purpose in the king's spiritual journey. Among the most important of these gods was Osiris, the god of the afterlife, death, and resurrection. Osiris was the ruler of the Duat, the underworld, and his judgment was the final test for any soul seeking to pass into the afterlife. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony, depicted in numerous texts and tombs, shows the soul of the deceased being weighed against the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and justice. If the heart was found to be light and pure, the deceased would be granted entrance to the afterlife, where they could join the gods in eternal bliss. If the heart was heavy with sin, the soul would be cast into the flames, forever denied a place among the divine. In Tutankhamun's tomb, images and texts related to Osiris were carefully placed to ensure that the king would be judged favourably. The Book of the Dead, an ancient Egyptian funerary text, was often placed with the deceased, offering spells and incantations to guide the soul through the perilous journey of the afterlife. Though there is no definitive evidence that the Book of the Dead was placed in Tutankhamun's tomb, other texts and rituals related to Osiris were almost certainly used to prepare the king for the trials he would face. The Duat itself was a treacherous place, filled with obstacles, demons, and serpents, all of which were designed to test the deceased's worthiness. But the gods were not without compassion. For those who had lived righteously and fulfilled their duties on earth, the afterlife was a place of peace, a land of fields of reeds where the soul would be able to live in, eternal comfort. The treasures in Tutankhamun's tomb, the statues of gods, the amulets, the offerings, all of these were meant to help him on his journey and ultimately to ensure that his soul would find peace. As the boy king's body lay within the tomb surrounded by these artifacts, he was not just being prepared for the afterlife, he was being elevated to a divine status. In death, he would become one with the gods, joining those who had passed before him in the eternal realm of the Aru, the Egyptian paradise. The elaborate rituals and the treasures left with him were not merely tokens of wealth, but symbols of the king's divine nature and his journey to a place of eternal peace. The journey of the soul did not end with the Duat, however. After passing through the trials of the underworld, the soul would reach the Hall of Judgment, where it would be weighed against the feather of Maat. The Ka and Ba would be united in the form of the Ak, a divine being capable of taking on an eternal form. The soul, now freed from the constraints of mortality, would join the gods in the celestial realm, where it would live forever in the company of Ra, the sun god, and Osiris. For the pharaohs, this final union with the divine was the ultimate goal, the assurance that their reign on earth would be immortalized in the heavens. Though Tutankhamun's reign was cut short, the spiritual journey he embarked upon in death was just as significant as any earthly accomplishment. His tomb, filled with symbols of divine power, ensured that his soul would take its place among the gods. The treasures, the rituals, and the gods invoked were all designed to help him navigate the complex and treacherous realms of the afterlife. And while his earthly reign was brief and largely uneventful, his spiritual journey would never end. In death, he would continue to be part of Egypt's divine order, his soul intertwined with the eternal cycles of the gods. The rituals of the afterlife, the texts, the amulets, and the statues placed with him in his tomb were a reflection of the immense importance placed on the journey to the next world. Death, in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, was not an end, but a transition, a journey to a new realm, one that required guidance, protection, and divine assistance. The boy king's tomb, though small and hurriedly constructed, contained everything necessary to ensure that he would face this journey with the same dignity and power that any other ruler might have. His afterlife was to be just as grand as his earthly reign, filled with gods, offerings, and eternal peace. As we stand before the tomb today, we're reminded that the ancient Egyptians were not merely concerned with death. They believed in life beyond death, in an existence that transcended the mortal world. And in Tutankhamun's tomb, we see the culmination of this belief, a belief that, even after death, the soul could continue its journey, guided by the wisdom of the gods and the protection of the sacred rituals. In this way, Tutankhamun's spiritual legacy lives on, not just in the treasures that filled his tomb, but in the eternal journey he embarked upon, long after his earthly reign had ended. Chapter 7. Farewell to the Boy King. The desert stretches wide before us, silent and eternal. The air is warm, heavy with the weight of millennia, as the sun sets beyond the horizon, casting long, soft shadows over the sands. Here, in the Valley of the Kings, the tombs of Egypt's ancient rulers lie undisturbed, their secrets buried beneath the earth. Yet none of them has captured our imagination like the Boy King, whose story has echoed through the ages. And so, we come to the end of this journey, a journey through the life, death, and afterlife of Tutankhamun, the boy who once ruled an empire, only to be forgotten by history. His name, once lost to time, is now among the most famous in the world thanks to the treasures that lay waiting for us in the silence of his tomb. These treasures, so carefully crafted and so deeply imbued with meaning, have ensured that his legacy would endure long after the last whispers of his reign faded into the past. But as we bid farewell to this story, we must ask, what have we truly learned? What is the essence of the Boy King's legacy, and what does it mean for us today? When we first embarked on this journey, we may have expected to uncover the answers to questions about his life, his reign, and the riches he left behind. But what we've discovered is something far more profound, a window into a world that believed in immortality, in divine order, and in the sacredness of life and death. Tutankhamun's tomb was not just a repository for wealth, it was a reflection of the civilization that created it. It was a place where art, religion, and power intertwined, where each object placed within the tomb told a story not just of the king, but of an entire culture. The Boy King's reign, though short and marked by instability, was also a reflection of Egypt at a crossroads. His tomb, hastily constructed, yet filled with treasures meant to ensure his journey into the afterlife, tells us that he, like all pharaohs, was not merely a ruler on earth, but a divine being with a role to play in the eternal order of the universe. His death, sudden and tragic, did not sever his connection to the divine. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter written in the treasures, symbols, and rituals of the afterlife. And so, as we stand here today, reflecting on the legacy of Tutankhamun, we're reminded that his story is not one of power or political achievement. It is not one of military conquest or grand reforms. His legacy is one of mystery, one that transcends the ordinary events of a life lived. The treasures in his tomb, the gold, the jewellery, the statues and the chariots are not just symbols of wealth. They are symbols of a civilization's deepest beliefs in immortality, divine protection, and the eternal nature of the soul. In his tomb, we see the culmination of Egypt's spiritual worldview. The boy king, like all those who came before him, was not just a ruler. He was a link between the mortal world and the divine. He was a living god, placed on earth to ensure the cosmic order, to maintain Ma'at, the balance of truth, justice, and harmony. But his reign was fleeting, his life tragically short, and his tomb became his most enduring testament. The discovery of his tomb did more than reveal treasures. It revealed a belief system that would shape Egypt for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians did not see death as an end, but as a transition, a crossing into a realm where the soul would continue its journey. For the pharaohs, the afterlife was just as significant as life itself, and the king's tomb was not simply a burial place, but a vessel for the soul's journey into eternity. The objects placed in the tomb, the texts and statues, the gold and jewels, all were tools to ensure a smooth passage to the afterlife, to join the gods and live forever in a world of peace and abundance. For all his wealth and power, Tutankhamun was still a child. His reign was not defined by military campaigns or grand political moves, yet in death he became something greater. His tomb, though small compared to others in the Valley of the Kings, was filled with treasures that reflected not just his status as king, but as a divine being. His legacy, then, is not just about the riches left behind, but about the culture and the belief system that produced them. It is about the rituals and the faith in the afterlife that sustained an entire civilization for thousands of years. As we move forward, we realize that Tutankhamun's story is, in many ways, a reflection of the human experience. It is a story about the fragility of life, about the fleeting nature of power, and about the way in which we leave behind something of ourselves that endures long after we are gone. Whether through the monuments we build, the art we create, or the ideas we pass on, each of us seeks a way to transcend our mortality. The boy king's tomb, filled with its treasures, serves as a testament to this universal desire to be remembered, to leave something behind that will endure. But beyond the wealth and the grandeur of his tomb lies a deeper truth, a truth that speaks to the core of the human condition. Tutankhamun, though a king, was still a child, and his tomb reveals a vulnerability that resonates with us all. In the end, we are all fragile, and no matter how much wealth or power we accumulate, we cannot escape the inevitable. Yet, it is in our vulnerability, in the recognition of our own mortality, that we find meaning. Tutankhamun's legacy is not just in the treasures left behind, but in the way his story speaks to our own fears and hopes, our desire for immortality, our longing for meaning, and our search for peace in the face of death. As we stand before the tomb today, we are reminded that the past is never truly gone. The echoes of history are all around us, in the artifacts, in the stories, in the symbols that continue to shape our world. Tutankhamun's name, once lost to time, has endured because it is tied to something greater than a single life. It is tied to the eternal journey of the soul, to the beliefs that shaped a civilization, and to the human desire to transcend time and live on in some form. The boy king's tomb was not just a resting place. It was a doorway into a world of myth and belief, a reflection of the spiritual journey that each soul must take. The treasures within it were not just for his enjoyment in the afterlife. They were the tools that would help him navigate the trials of the Duat, the underworld, and find his place among the gods. The golden mask, the statues of gods, the chariots, They were all designed to ensure that his soul would be protected, that he would find peace, and that his name would live on forever. And so, as we say farewell to Tutankhamun, we do so with gratitude and reverence. His story, his tomb, his treasures, each one invites us to reflect on our own lives, on our own legacies, and on the way in which we too seek to be remembered. His tomb, with its treasures, its mysteries and its secrets, will continue to captivate us for generations to come. It is not just a story of a boy king. It is a story of all of us, of the way in which we seek meaning in a world that is often fleeting and fragile. As the last echoes of his name fade into the night, we are left with a deeper understanding of what it means to live, to die, and to leave something behind that endures. The sands of Egypt will continue to shift, and the tombs of the pharaohs will continue to hold their secrets, but the story of the boy king will never be lost. His legacy, though rooted in the distant past, speaks to the very heart of the human experience, a reminder that, in the end, we all seek immortality, whether through the monuments we build, the stories we leave behind, or the way we connect with the eternal. Good night, dear listener, and may you carry with you the echoes of Tutankhamun's journey as the world around us slips quietly back into sleep.